August 1942, Guadalcanal. Japanese soldiers charged through the jungle, expecting the familiar crack of rifles and the honor of bayonet combat, but instead were met with a thunderous boom that tore through multiple men at once, a weapon they'd never trained for and their commanders never warned them about. The Americans had brought 12-gauge pump-action shotguns to the Pacific, and in seconds, Japan's doctrine of close-quarters spiritual warfare collapsed against industrial pragmatism. But here's what haunts the survivors. If Japanese intelligence completely missed something as basic as shotguns being standard marine issue, what else did the Empire lie to them about?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. August 1942. The jungle air on Guadalcanal hung thick and hot like a wet blanket. Private Takeshi Yamada crouched in the darkness, gripping his Ithaca rifle with sweaty hands. He was 22 years old and already a veteran. He had fought in Malaya. He had seen British soldiers run. He had watched his unit take Singapore in just 70 days. The Americans would be no different. That's what everyone said. Sergeant Hiroshi Tanaka moved down the line, checking each man. His face was hard like stone. He had fought in China. He had trained for 15 years. He whispered the same thing to every soldier. The Americans are soft. They have machines but no spirit. We have Bushido. We will win with our souls. Takeshi nodded. He believed it. Every Japanese soldier believed it. The plan was simple. They would charge the beach at night. They would use their bayonets. They would fight up close, where courage mattered more than bullets. The Americans had taken Henderson Field 2 weeks ago. Tonight, the Japanese would take it back. 2,000 men waited in the jungle. They had done this before. The formula always worked. Shock, speed, steel. Takeshi touched the bayonet on his belt. He had trained with it for months. Thrust, twist, withdraw. The instructors said the bayonet was the soul of the infantry. A gun could jam. A bayonet never failed. He thought about the Americans waiting on the beach. They probably had nice boots and good food. But did they have a warrior spirit? The propaganda said no. The propaganda said Americans loved comfort too much to die well. The signal came at midnight. 2,000 men rose as one. They moved through the jungle toward the beach. Takeshi's heart pounded. He could hear the ocean now. He could smell salt in the air. 50 yards away, he saw the American positions. Dark shapes behind sandbags. This was it. This was where Japanese training would prove superior to American wealth. Sergeant Tanaka raised his sword. The blade caught moonlight. Then he screamed. 2,000 voices answered. They burst from the jungle like a wave. Takeshi ran hard, his boots digging into sand. 20 yards from the American line. 15 yards. He raised his rifle. He could see helmets now. He prepared for rifle fire. He prepared for the clash of bayonets. Then came the sound. Not the crack of rifles, not the pop of pistols. A thunder that split the night. Boom, boom, boom. Like cannons, but faster. Like nothing Takeshi had ever heard. The man beside him simply came apart. Not shot, shredded. Multiple hits at once. Impossible. Another boom. Another soldier was destroyed. Takeshi hit the sand. His mind couldn't understand. What weapon did this have? In the muzzle flash, he saw it. Short barrels. Americans are pumping them fast. Shooting, pumping, shooting again. Each blast is like a wall of bullets. This wasn't in the training. This wasn't supposed to happen. Takeshi woke to white light and the smell of chemicals. His left shoulder burned with pain. He tried to move, but leather straps held him down. American voices spoke words he didn't understand. A medic leaned over him. The man had gentle hands. He gave Takeshi water. This confused Takeshi more than the straps. Why would the enemy be kind? 3 days passed before they moved him to the prisoner camp. His shoulder was bandaged clean and tight. Better than Japanese field hospitals, if he was honest. The camp sat inland, surrounded by wire fences and guard towers. 200 Japanese prisoners lived here now. Most came from the same failed beach attack. Takeshi saw faces he recognized. Men from his unit. Men who had charged with him into that terrible thunder. The Americans put them in a tent with 5 other soldiers. They gave him a cot with a thin mattress. They gave him a blanket. They gave him clothes without blood. One prisoner, a corporal named Kenji, had been here for 2 weeks. He spoke quietly at night when the guards couldn't hear. "The weapon that killed our brothers," Kenji said. "It's called a shotgun. The Americans use them for hunting at home. Now they hunt us." Takeshi couldn't sleep that night. A shotgun, a hunting weapon, not even a military rifle. The Americans had killed trained infantry with tools made for shooting ducks. The shame burned hotter than his wounded shoulder. But something else burned too. A question. If shotguns were just hunting tools, why had no one told the Japanese army about them? Surely intelligence officers knew Americans hunted. Surely someone had seen these weapons before. The next morning, guards brought breakfast. Takeshi expected thin rice soup, maybe some pickled vegetables. Instead, they brought trays loaded with food. Scrambled eggs, toast with butter, canned peaches, coffee with sugar. Takeshi stared at his tray. This was more food than Japanese soldiers got in 3 days. Kenji saw his face and nodded. "Every morning," he said. "Every single morning. This is normal for them." After breakfast, an American officer came to speak with them. He was young, maybe 25. He spoke through a translator, a Japanese-American soldier who looked uncomfortable in his uniform. The officer said they would be treated fairly under the Geneva Convention. He said they would work, but not as slaves. He said they could write letters home. Then he said something that made Takeshi's mind stop. "We know you were told Americans torture prisoners. That's not true. You'll see."
The officer left. The prisoners sat in silence. Finally, an older soldier named Hiro spoke. "My cousin lives in California. He wrote letters before the war. He said Americans eat like this every day. We thought he was exaggerating." No one answered. The idea was too big to fit inside their heads. They put Takeshi to work after his shoulder healed. The job was simple. He loaded supply trucks at the depot. On his first day, he saw things that made no sense. Boxes of shotgun shells stacked higher than his head. Not a few boxes, hundreds, thousands. Each box held 25 shells. Each shell held 9 lead pellets. Takeshi did the math in his head and felt sick. The Americans had enough ammunition to reload every shotgun 100 times over. And this was just one small supply depot on one small island. A Marine guard stood nearby, a shotgun hanging loose from his shoulder. Takeshi gathered his courage and spoke in broken English. "How many?" He pointed at the boxes. The Marine didn't understand. Takeshi tried again. "How many shotguns in Marines?" The guard laughed, not meanly, and held up all his fingers twice. "Every squad's got at least 2, buddy, sometimes more for island fighting. We got thousands of these things." Thousands. Takeshi felt something crack inside his chest, not his ribs, something deeper.
The Japanese army had taught him that America was rich but lazy, strong in factories but weak in spirit. But here was the truth. The Americans were rich enough to make thousands of specialized weapons just for one type of fighting. They had thought about jungle combat. They had designed tools for it. They had built those tools by the thousands. Then they had shipped them across the world's largest ocean, and they had trained men to use them well. During lunch break, Takeshi sat with other prisoners under a palm tree. They shared a meal of beef stew and bread. Another impossible amount of food. A prisoner named Sato spoke quietly. "I was at Tarawa. They had shotguns there too, in the bunkers. When we tried to fight inside, the Americans just stood around corners and fired. We couldn't get close enough to use bayonets. It was like fighting ghosts with thunder." Another man nodded. Saipan was the same. They had different guns for different jobs. Long rifles for distance, short rifles for medium, shotguns for close. We just had our Arisakas and hoped for the best. The men fell quiet. They were all thinking the same thing. The Japanese way of war was brave but simple. One rifle, one bayonet, one strategy. The American way was different. They had a type of gun for every problem, and they had enough factories to make all of them at once. It wasn't about courage. It was about thinking ahead. It was about having so many resources that you could afford to be prepared for anything. That afternoon, a supply truck arrived. Takeshi watched the Americans unload it. He saw crates of ammunition. He saw boxes of medical supplies. He saw fresh vegetables. He saw something painted red and white that the Americans got excited about. The translator saw Takeshi's confusion and smiled sadly. "Coca-Cola," he said. "It's a sweet drink. They ship it to every base, even here." Takeshi watched Marines crack open glass bottles and drink like it was water. How rich did a country have to be to ship sweet drinks to a war zone? How powerful did a nation have to be to worry about whether soldiers enjoyed their beverages? That night, Takeshi lay on his cot and stared at the tent ceiling. Kenji was snoring softly. Sato was writing a letter home by candlelight. Takeshi's mind kept returning to the shotguns. Not just the weapons themselves, but what they meant. The Americans had looked at Pacific Islands and thought, what weapon works best in tight spaces? Then they had simply built that weapon. No tradition, no ceremony, no attachment to old ways. Just cold, practical thinking. If bayonet charges were the best answer, Americans would use bayonets. But they had decided shotguns were better. So they used shotguns. Japan had bet everything on spirit, on discipline, on the warrior's heart. These things were real, and they mattered. Takeshi still believed that. But America had bet on something else, on thinking clearly, on building smart, on having enough wealth to prepare for everything. Both sides had courage. Both sides had brave men. But only one side had asked the right questions before the war started. Takeshi touched his wounded shoulder. The American doctor had removed 17 pieces of buckshot. 17 small lead balls from a single shotgun blast. If the Marine had been 5 yards closer, Takeshi would be dead. If there had been no shotgun, maybe Takeshi would have reached the American line. Maybe his bayonet would have mattered then. But there had been a shotgun. The Americans had made sure of it. They had planned for men like Takeshi. They had built the right tool for the job. Sleep came slowly. In his dreams, Takeshi saw the muzzle flash again, heard the thunder again. But now he understood it differently. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a message. America had thought about this war before it started. Japan had believed in destiny. Only one of those approaches could win. Takeshi was beginning to understand which one. The change came on Thanksgiving Day, 1942. Takeshi didn't know what Thanksgiving meant. The translator explained it was an American holiday about being grateful, about having enough food to share. The prisoners expected nothing special, maybe an extra piece of bread. What they got instead shattered everything Takeshi thought he understood about war. The Americans brought tables outside and covered them with white sheets. Then came the food. Roasted turkey, golden brown, and bigger than any chicken Takeshi had ever seen. Mashed potatoes with pools of melted butter. Sweet potatoes covered in brown sugar. Green beans, dinner rolls, cranberry sauce that gleamed like rubies. And pie. 3 different kinds of pie. The prisoners stood in a line and stared. Some of them started to cry. Takeshi took his plate while shaking hands. An American cook piled it high with food. More food than Takeshi's family ate in a week back home. The cook smiled at him. Actually smiled, like Takeshi was a guest instead of an enemy. Like feeding him well was the natural thing to do. Takeshi sat at a table with Kenji and Sato. None of them spoke. They just ate. The turkey melted in his mouth. The potatoes were smooth as silk. He had never tasted anything so rich.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. After the meal, an American officer stood to speak. It was Captain Morrison, the education officer who visited the camp twice a week. He was older than most soldiers, maybe 40, with gray at his temples. He spoke slowly so the translator could keep up. "Today, we give thanks for what we have," Morrison said. "We know you're far from home. We know you miss your families. But while you're here, we'll treat you like human beings. That's the American way." Takeshi felt something break loose inside him. Not anger, not sadness, something bigger, a wall crumbling. His father had told him Americans were devils. His sergeants had said Americans were weak and selfish. The propaganda had painted them as monsters who would torture prisoners and laugh. But here was the truth. The Americans fed their enemies better than Japan fed its own soldiers. They gave medicine to men who had tried to kill them. They followed rules even when rules were inconvenient. That night, Captain Morrison held one of his education sessions. He did this every week. The Japanese officers had ordered prisoners not to attend, but many came anyway. What else was there to do? Morrison talked about American military thinking. He used simple words and drew pictures on a chalkboard. Tonight's topic was combined arms doctrine. Takeshi sat in the back and listened. "We don't believe in fair fights," Morrison said. The translator hesitated, like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Morrison smiled. "That sounds bad, doesn't it? But here's what I mean. If we're fighting in a jungle, we bring shotguns. If we're fighting in open ground, we bring rifles. If we're fighting tanks, we bring tank destroyers. We use the right tool for every job. That's not cowardly, that's smart." He drew on the board. A simple diagram. Different weapons for different ranges. Shotguns for 0 to 25 yards. Rifles for 25 to 400 yards. Machine guns for support. Mortars for indirect fire. Each tool had a purpose. Each purpose had a tool. "Your army taught you that spirit conquers all," Morrison said. "That's beautiful. I respect that. But spirit doesn't stop bullets. Spirit doesn't win wars. Preparation wins wars. Industry wins wars. Thinking ahead wins wars." Takeshi felt those words sink into his bones. He thought about the beach at Guadalcanal. The Japanese had charged with courage, with discipline, with hearts full of loyalty to the emperor, and they had died. Not because they were cowards, not because they lacked spirit, but because the Americans had thought more carefully about what weapons work best at 15 yards in the dark. The shotgun wasn't dishonorable, it was just correct. Morrison continued, "We're not better people than you, we're not braver, but our system works differently. When American generals see a problem, they ask, what tool do we need? Then our factories build that tool. Sometimes we build the wrong thing. Sometimes we make mistakes. But we keep trying new ideas. We don't stick to old ways just because they're traditional. After the session ended, Takeshi stayed behind. He approached Captain Morrison carefully. His English was getting better after 3 months in camp. "Captain," he said, "question please." Morrison nodded kindly. Takeshi chose his words with care. "In Japan, we are taught the old ways are best. Bushido, samurai spirit. This is our soul. But you say new ways are better. How do we keep our soul and also think like you?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Takeshi with something like respect. "That's the best question anyone's asked me," he said. "Here's what I think. Keep your soul. Keep your discipline and your loyalty and your courage. Those things matter. But don't let tradition stop you from seeing the truth. The samurai were great warriors, but they didn't have factories. They didn't have shotguns. The world changed. Your country needs to change with it." Takeshi walked back to his tent under a sky full of stars. The same stars that shone over Japan, over his village, over his parents' house. He wondered if his father could see these stars too. He wondered what his father would think of this American captain who spoke about honor and tradition with respect, but also said Japan had made terrible mistakes. That night, Takeshi wrote in a small notebook the Americans had given him. He had started keeping a diary in secret. He wrote in Japanese, so the gods couldn't read it. The words came slowly, but they came. "We were taught the enemy feared the blade. But they did not fear. They simply chose a better tool. A shotgun at 10 meters is not cowardice. It is understanding war as engineering, not poetry. We fought with our souls. They fought with their minds. Both matter, but only one wins." He put down his pencil and closed the notebook. Outside, guards walked their rounds. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played American music. Takeshi lay back on his cot and closed his eyes. He still loved Japan. He still honored the emperor. But he could no longer lie to himself. His country had sent brave men to fight a rich nation with old ideas and simple tools. America had not beaten Japan with cruelty. They had beaten Japan with clear thinking and endless resources. The shotgun had taught him that, and now he could never unlearn it. The ship that carried Takeshi home arrived in Yokohama Harbor on a cold morning in December 1946. More than 4 years had passed since that night on Guadalcanal. 4 years of prison camp. 4 years of learning English and listening to Captain Morrison's lessons. 4 years of watching American efficiency and abundance. 4 years of thinking about shotguns and what they meant. Takeshi stood at the rail and watched Japan appear through the mist. His heart should have soared. This was home. This was everything he had dreamed about during those long nights in the tent. But as the harbor came into focus, his heart sank instead. The city was broken. Buildings stood like skeletons. The docks were half destroyed. People on the shore looked thin and gray. This was victory's opposite of victory. This was what losing looked like.
The former prisoners walked down the gangplank in silence. American soldiers watched them go without anger or celebration, just men doing a job. Takeshi carried everything he owned in a small canvas bag. Inside was his notebook filled with observations, a pencil, 2 books Captain Morrison had given him about American industry, and a photograph of the prison camp on the last day, all the prisoners and guards standing together. Morrison had insisted on the photograph. "So you remember," he had said. "Not all enemies have to hate each other." Takeshi's father was waiting at the processing station. He looked older than Takeshi remembered, thinner. His clothes hung loose on his frame. When he saw Takeshi, tears filled his eyes. They embraced without words. What could words say? The father had sent a son to war.
The sun had come back, but the country had been destroyed. They walked through the ruined streets together. Every block showed bomb damage. Every corner had people begging, children with hungry eyes, old women selling family treasures for rice. This was the empire that was supposed to last 1,000 years. At home, Takeshi's mother prepared tea, real tea saved for this special day. The house was cold. They had burned most of the furniture for heat last winter. His younger sister looked at him with curiosity. She had been 12 when he left. Now she was 16 and looked 20. War had aged everyone. They sat around a low table, and his father finally asked the question. How did we lose to such people? The Americans were supposed to be soft, weak. Our generals said their soldiers wouldn't fight, but they destroyed us. How? Takeshi thought carefully before answering. He could tell them about the shotguns, about the combined arms doctrine, about the supply depots stacked with enough ammunition to fight for years. But those were just symptoms. The real answer was deeper. Father, he said slowly, we believed war was about spirit. The Americans knew it was about industry. We trained our hearts. They built their factories. Both matter, but only one wins when the fighting starts. His father's face hardened. So you're saying we were wrong? That Bushido means nothing? That the warrior's way is worthless? Takeshi shook his head quickly. No, father. Courage matters. Discipline matters. Loyalty matters. But we let those things blind us. We thought spirit could beat steel. We thought tradition could beat innovation. The Americans respected our courage. They just built better tools to fight it. He opened his bag and took out the notebook. I wrote everything down. What I saw, what I learned. The Americans didn't win because they were better people. They won because they asked better questions. When they needed to fight in jungles, they asked what weapon works best at close range. Then they built that weapon, thousands of them. We asked, how can we be braver? The answer to their question saved American lives. The answer to our question just made Japanese deaths more honorable. His mother spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but firm. What would you have us do differently? Give up being Japanese? Become American? Takeshi looked at her with love. She didn't understand yet. No, mother. Stay Japanese. Keep our values. But add their thinking. They have a saying in English. Work smarter, not harder. We worked so hard. We fought so bravely. But we didn't work smart. And that's why you have no furniture to burn this winter. The next morning, Takeshi walked through Yokohama looking for work. The city was trying to rebuild. Americans were everywhere now, part of the occupation. Takeshi saw them directing traffic, distributing food, helping clear rubble. It was strange seeing them here. These were the same uniforms he'd seen in the prison camp, but now they were on Japanese soil, winners helping losers. It seemed wrong and right at the same time. He found work at a factory being rebuilt to make textiles. The owner was an old man named Suzuki, who had lost 2 sons in the war. He hired Takeshi because he was young and strong. The factory was a mess. Old machines, inefficient layout. Workers doing things the hard way, because that's how they'd always been done. Takeshi watched for a week before he spoke up. Mr. Suzuki, he said carefully one evening, may I make a suggestion? The old man looked at him with suspicion. Young men didn't usually tell owners how to run factories. But something in Takeshi's voice made him listen. Speak, Suzuki said. Takeshi pulled out his notebook. In America, I watched how they organized their work. Everything has a place. Every tool has a purpose. They don't move things twice if they can move them once. May I show you? For the next month, Takeshi reorganized the factory floor. He moved machines closer together. He created stations where workers had all their tools in reach. He drew diagrams like Captain Morrison had drawn on the chalkboard. Suzuki was skeptical at first, but he was also desperate. The factory needed to produce more with less. After the changes, production increased by 30%. Workers went home less tired. Suzuki looked at Takeshi with new respect. "Where did you learn this?" Suzuki asked. Takeshi didn't hesitate. "In an American prison camp, from an officer who taught us how they think." Suzuki was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "My sons died fighting Americans. I should hate everything about them. But if their thinking can help us rebuild, then maybe their deaths weren't completely wasted. Teach the other workers what you know." Takeshi became an informal teacher. During lunch breaks, he gathered workers and shared lessons from his notebook. He told them about American efficiency, about asking what tool fits what job, about doing things just because that's how grandfather did them. Some workers were angry. They said he was betraying Japanese culture. Others listened carefully. They were hungry and poor and tired of old ways that led to ruin. Years passed. The factory grew. Takeshi married and had children. He never forgot the lessons from the prison camp. He never forgot the shotguns. Sometimes at night, he would take out that photograph. All those men standing together. Former enemies who had learned to see each other as human. Captain Morrison had written on the back in English. Takeshi had translated it many times. "May you build a better future than the past we shared."
When Takeshi's own son turned 20, the boy asked about the war. Takeshi was older now, 46, with gray in his hair. They sat in a small but comfortable house. Japan was rebuilding fast. The factories were humming. The economy was growing. His son wanted to know how Japan had risen from the ashes. Takeshi thought about all the answers he could give. The American aid, the hard work, the new constitution. But he gave the answer that mattered most. "We lost the war on a beach in 1942, Takeshi said, "the moment I heard a shotgun for the first time. Not because the weapon killed us, but because it showed us the truth. America had thought about every problem and built a solution. We had thought about honor and hoped for the best. After the war, we finally learned the lesson. Keep your honor, keep your discipline, but also think clearly. Ask hard questions, build good answers. That's what made Japan strong again." His son looked confused. "A shotgun taught you this?" Takeshi smiled and pulled out his old notebook. The pages were yellow now. The writing was faded, but the lessons were still clear. The shotgun was a message. It said that tradition without adaptation is just another word for defeat. It said that the side willing to change has an advantage over the side that refuses. Your grandfather's generation learned this lesson in blood. My generation learned it in prison camps. Your generation gets to learn it in peace. Don't waste that gift. That night, Takeshi stood outside and looked at the stars. The same stars that had watched him charge across that beach so many years ago. The same stars that had shone over the prison camp. The same stars that now watched over a Japan rebuilt and reimagined. He thought about the Marines who had carried those shotguns. Most of them are probably home now, living quiet lives. Maybe they thought about the war sometimes. Maybe they remembered the Japanese soldiers who had charged so bravely towards certain death. Takeshi hoped they knew something. He hoped they understood that their shotguns had taught more than how to win battles. They had taught that clear thinking matters, that asking the right questions before the fighting starts saves lives on both sides, that a nation's strength comes not from its willingness to die for old ideas, but from its ability to live for new ones. The shotgun had been a weapon of war, but its real power was the lesson it carried, and that lesson had helped build the peace. He whispered to the stars in English, words Captain Morrison had taught him. "Thank you for the hard lesson. We finally learned it."
Then he went inside to his family, to his warm house, to his country that had been broken and was now healing. The shotgun had taken so much, but in the end it had also given something back. The painful gift of truth. And truth, however hard, was always better than the comfortable lie. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.